Welcome back to the Sense Check Lab, where we put today's lifestyle trends under the microscope and fact-check the common sense with scientific researches.
Today, we're diving deep into something you've definitely seen everywhere.
Oh yeah, plant-based milks. They've completely taken over, haven't they? Your coffee shop, the supermarket aisle.
Absolutely. Oat, almond, soy, rice, coconut. I mean, the list just seems to keep getting longer.
And their popularity isn't just hype, it's really massive. The researches we looked at show some incredible numbers, like in the U.S., one analysis, sales volume jumped 20% in just 2020.
20% in 1 year.
Yeah. And that was like 15% of all retail milk sales in dollar terms. And get this, 40% of U.S. households apparently bought plant-based milk that year.
40%. Wow.
Right. And between 2017 and 2019, sales were growing by over $120 million each year on average.
That's some serious growth. And it's not just a U.S. thing, right?
No, not at all. The UK market, worth about $400 million a year, according to the research. And something like 1 in 3 Brits are drinking these dairy-free milks regularly.
Okay, so with that kind of, explosion in popularity, the big questions start coming up. And the researchers are definitely digging into this.
Exactly. Like, are these plant-based milks really the healthy, nutritious alternatives people think they are?
Or are a lot of them actually more like, well, ultra-processed drinks designed to look like milk, maybe without all the same nutritional good stuff?
That is the core question for today's deep dive.
Okay.
We've gathered a whole stack of researches to try and unpack exactly that, what's really inside that carton.
Right. So first things first, what are we talking about? Plant-based milks essentially are non-dairy drinks. They're made from could be grains, nuts, legumes, seeds.
All sorts.
Yeah, and they're formulated, specifically made to kind of mimic the texture and uses of dairy milk.
And we see so many types now. The researchers kept mentioning the big ones.
Yeah.
Oat, almond, soy, rice, coconut, pea milk is getting popular, cashew, hemp.
It's a crowded field. And, their history in the market is interesting, too, especially if we look at the U.S. based on the researches.
Like soy milk. That one's been around a while.
Ages, yeah. Globally for centuries. And manufactured in the U.S. since way back in 1917. Originally, it was mostly for infant formula.
Right.
Then its popularity kind of grew in the late 90s, early 2000s. There was research linking soy protein and lower cholesterol, which helped. But then sales kind of slowed down. There were some concerns floating around about isoflavones in soy. Later studies mostly concluded typical amounts aren't harmful long-term, but, the perception maybe stuck a bit. Anyway, one research pointed out that soy milk sales actually dropped by nearly $50 million a year on average between 2017 and 2019.
So the original leader started to fade a bit.
Pretty much. And that's when almond milk really stepped up. It first appeared in those refrigerated cartons around 2008.
Okay.
And with the whole rise of veganism and just general interest in plant-based eating, it just took off. It actually zoomed past soy milk sales by 2014. And now, it's the biggest seller in the U.S. plant-based milk category. Sales were climbing by like $105 million per year on average during that same 2017-2019 period. Huge increase.
That's incredible growth. And then there's oat milk, which feels like the newest superstar.
Right. Oat milk's actually been sold in the U.S. since '96, believe it or not.
Really? Since the 90s?
Yeah, but its massive growth spurt is much more recent. Like, since 2016, sales more than doubled just since 2017. That's an average increase of over $63 million a year.
That's wild.
It overtook soy milk sales in 2021, but it's still, quite a bit behind almond milk overall.
So it's not just people switching from dairy, it's also people switching between different plant milks. The whole category is shifting.
Exactly. And the researchers say it's down to things like changing demographics, different food environments, and definitely consumer preferences, that growing interest in veganism or just eating more plants.
Okay, that sets the scene. Super popular, lots of variety, dynamic market.
Yeah.
But let's get back to that processing question. How are they actually made? Because it's not just like blending some almonds with water at home, is it?
Not usually, no. And that's a really key point the researchers drive home. On a very basic level, yeah, it starts with the plant material and water.
Okay.
But the ultra-processed label often fits because these are, formulated drinks. They're engineered, designed to imitate milk.
Engineered.
Yeah, and that means the main ingredient, the plant base, it goes through quite a bit of processing to get it out of its natural state. And then the final drink usually has a whole list of other ingredients added in, stuff you probably wouldn't just have lying around your kitchen.
So definitely more complex than my weekend smoothie attempt.
Yeah, quite a bit more. One research actually compared the number of manufacturing steps. Dairy milk, pretty minimal processing, mainly just sanitization, pasteurization for safety, usually no additives.
Right.
Plant-based milks, way more steps involved. That research estimated something like 13 steps for soy milk, 14 for oat, maybe even 15 steps for almond milk.
15 steps. Okay, that really highlights the manufacturing involved.
It really does. And a big part of those steps involves adding stuff. The researchers listed the usual suspects. Stabilizers, you see things like locust bean gum, gellan gum, xanthan gum, gar gum. Those help keep it from separating.
Okay, keeps it smooth.
Exactly. Then emulsifiers, like lecithins, to keep everything blended nicely. And often added sugars. That's a big one added to improve the taste, whereas cow's milk only has naturally occurring lactose.
Right, the sweetness factor.
Yeah.
What about the vitamins and minerals? Aren't they often added back in?
Yes, fortification is a huge part of it. To try and get closer to dairy milk's nutritional profile, manufacturers add vitamins, often D, A, E, B2, B12, and minerals too. Calcium is a big one, usually forms like tricalcium phosphate or calcium carbonate. You might also see zinc oxide, potassium citrate, magnesium phosphate added, plus sometimes added oils, maybe sunflower oil, salt or sea salt, natural flavors, colors, maybe other thickeners or starches like tapioca starch.
Oh, okay. That ingredient list can get pretty long. It definitely makes sense why they'd be called constructed beverages then.
Precisely. It's that whole process, the multiple steps, the formulation, all those additives that leads many of them to be classified as ultra-processed.
All right, so we know they're popular, often heavily processed. Now for the million-dollar question. How do they stack up nutritionally compared to good old cow's milk? Are they giving us the same health benefits?
This is where it gets really, really varied, according to the researchers. Dairy milk naturally is just loaded with nutrients. It's got high-quality protein, vitamins like B2, B12, minerals like calcium, phosphorus, potassium, iodine.
Kind of a natural multivitamin?
Pretty much. One research really stressed that it's a good source of several nutrients that the U.S. dietary guidelines point out are often lacking in people's diets: calcium, potassium, and vitamin D.
Okay, so dairy sets a high bar naturally. What about the plant milks?
Their nutritional quality. It depends entirely on what plant they started with. It varies wildly.
Right.
Now, many brands do try to bridge the gap by fortifying. They add back vitamin A, D, B12, calcium, etc. But even with that fortification, the research has consistently found significant differences often remain, especially in things like protein content, zinc, and potassium.
Protein seems to be the big one everyone talks about.
It's definitely a major difference for most types. Cow's milk has about, say, 8.2 grams of protein in a standard serving. That's 240 milliliter.
Okay.
Most plant milks, way lower. The data we saw put almond milk at just 1 gram, cashew maybe 1.8 grams, oat milk around 2.7 grams, and rice milk, barely any at like 0.7 grams per serving.
Whoa, that's a massive difference from 8 grams.
Huge gap. Soy milk is usually the closest, around 6.1 grams. And pea milk can also be quite high in protein, maybe 7.5 grams. But the others are much lower.
So if you're counting on your milk for protein, you really need to check the label.
Absolutely. And it's not just the amount of protein, it's also the quality. Animal protein, like from dairy, is generally considered higher biological quality, meaning it provides all the essential amino acids, the building blocks our bodies can't make in the right proportions. One research said it's maybe 10–30% higher quality. Plant proteins often lack enough of certain essential amino acids. You typically need to eat a variety of plant sources throughout the day to get the full set. Plus, the processing itself might affect the quality of the plant protein.
Interesting. Okay, what about calcium? People often switch thinking it's fortified, it's the same.
Yeah, that's a really critical point the researchers brought up. Many plant milks are fortified to match dairy's calcium level, which is around 309 milligrams per serving.
Right.
But the calcium naturally present in milk is linked with milk proteins, caseins, which helps our bodies absorb it well. The research has highlighted potential issues with the fortified calcium in plant milks.
Like what?
Things like sedimentation. The calcium can literally settle at the bottom of the carton, even if you shake it really well. Poor solubility, and just high variability in how much is actually available for your body to absorb. It makes the bioavailability, how much you actually use, uncertain compared to milk's natural calcium.
So the number on the label might not tell the whole story of what your bones are getting.
That's a key takeaway from the researchers. One even mentions studies suggesting calcium from supplements, which is similar to fortification, might have different health effects than getting calcium naturally from dairy foods.
Huh. That's definitely food for thought. What about other nutrients?
Differences there, too. Almond and cashew milks tend to be lower in zinc, potassium, and magnesium compared to dairy. Oat milk, generally lower in calcium and potassium, but one analysis suggested it could be a more affordable way to get some zinc and riboflavin.
In fat and sugar, people often see plant milks as lower fat.
They usually are lower in saturated fat and cholesterol compared to whole cow's milk. That's true. And it's a big, but remember those added sugars.
The taste enhancers.
Exactly. Many types have added sugars for flavor, whereas dairy only has natural lactose sugar. This adds to the processing level and also means many plant milks tend to have a higher glycemic index, or GI, than cow's milk.
What did that mean practically?
Well, milk's GI is around 47. Plant milks can range anywhere from 47 up to 100. A higher GI means it might raise your blood sugar more quickly, which is something people managing blood sugar might want to consider.
Okay, so nutritionally, definitely not a simple swap. Huge variations, reliance on fortification, differences in protein, calcium absorption, added sugars, but are there clear health benefits to choosing them?
The researchers did cover potential upsides. As we said, lower saturated fat and cholesterol compared to full-fat dairy could be a plus for heart health for some people. And depending on the source plant, they might offer other goodies, like fiber, especially in oat milk, or antioxidants. Vitamin E is often mentioned for almond milk.
And of course, they're essential for certain groups.
Absolutely crucial. They're fantastic alternatives for people with lactose intolerance, which affects a huge chunk of the global population, maybe 68% of adults, 36% in the U.S., even higher in some ethnic groups.
Yeah.
And obviously for those with cow's milk allergies. Plus, they're vital for anyone following a strictly vegan diet. One research specifically called out oat milk as being a gentle and safe option for kids diagnosed with a cow's milk protein allergy.
And what about the link to overall plant-based diets being healthy? Does that apply here?
Well, the researchers do acknowledge that plant-based diets, overall diets rich in fruits, veggies, legumes, whole grains, are linked to lower risks of chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, some cancers, and healthier body weights in adults. But it's important to distinguish that finding, which is about the whole dietary pattern, from the specific impact of just swapping your milk. The evidence for that specific swap having the same broad benefits isn't as strong yet.
And dairy milk itself has a lot of research behind its benefits, right?
It certainly does. Decades of research show its importance for kids' growth, bone development, height, weight gain. For adults, dairy is linked to better bone health, maybe lower fracture risk, though it's complex. And studies show neutral or even slightly positive associations with heart disease and type 2 diabetes risk, especially fermented dairy like yogurt.
So lots of research on dairy. How does the volume of research compare for plant-based milk specifically?
That's a key point the research has made. There's currently a much less specific long-term scientific evidence looking at the health outcomes of consuming these plant-based milk alternatives compared to the mountain of research on dairy.
Okay, so less long-term data, the nutritional differences, the processing, that leads us naturally into the potential downsides or concerns.
Yeah, and the research has outlined several. The lower protein content in most types and the potentially lower protein quality we discussed, that's a big nutritional drawback unless you're choosing something like fortified soy or pea. There's also a genuine risk of falling short on key nutrients if you're not careful. Things like calcium, zinc, iodine, riboflavin, B2, vitamin B12, even essential amino acids. This is particularly a concern for young children if plant milk becomes their main milk source without really careful dietary planning or ensuring adequate fortification. Their nutritional needs are just so high and specific compared to adults.
That's a really important point for parents. You can't just assume it's an equal swap for a growing child.
Definitely not. Then there are the additives themselves, the stabilizers, emulsifiers, gums, etc., and the added sugars, which contribute to that ultra-processed classification. And while processing can reduce some anti-nutrients naturally found in plants, like phytates, which can interfere with mineral absorption.
Okay, so processing can sometimes help.
It can, but the processing itself might also negatively affect things like protein quality, as we mentioned. And some researchers raise theoretical concerns about other compounds potentially forming during processing, though more study is needed there. And again, that higher glycemic index for many types is a factor.
And specifically regarding kids, did the researchers offer any clear recommendations?
They really stressed that more research is needed to be sure about the long-term safety and nutritional adequacy of all these different milk alternatives for children. Crucially, one research highlighted that the American Academy of Pediatrics currently recognizes only fortified soy-based formulas or milks as generally safe and nutritionally adequate alternatives for infants and toddlers under 24 months in most cases, aside from specific medical formulas.
Only soy for the under twos. That's quite specific.
It is, and it really underscores the need for caution. It shows that experts don't view all plant-based options as interchangeable or suitable replacements for dairy or breast milk infant formula during those critical early years.
Okay, so the bottom line seems to be useful for allergies or dietary choices, but requires real nutritional awareness, especially for kids and other vulnerable groups.
That sums it up well. Now, there's one other big piece to this puzzle that the researchers touched on, which is a major driver for many consumers.
The environment. Sustainability. That's
Well,
huge for a lot of people choosing these milks.
definitely. And broadly speaking, the researchers tend to back up the idea that dairy farming is pretty resource heavy. It uses a lot of land, a lot of water, and contributes significantly to global greenhouse gas emissions compared to growing plants.
So plant milks are generally better for the planet.
Generally, yes. Per liter or per kilogram of milk produced, plant-based options usually come out with a lower environmental footprint, less greenhouse gas, less water used.
Okay, that seems clear-cut.
Well, mostly.
Yeah.
But the research has also brought up some important nuances and exceptions.
But what?
Almond milk is the classic example. Its water footprint can actually be much higher than dairy milks, especially if the almonds are grown in places like California that rely heavily on irrigation in water-scarce areas.
Right, I've heard about the almonds and water issue.
Yeah, and one study suggested that rice milk might actually be the most greenhouse gas intensive among the plant milks they looked at, partly due to methane emissions from flooded rice paddies.
Interesting. So not all plant milks are equal environmentally either.
Exactly. On the flip side, oat milk and pea milk generally scored quite well in the researches, showing lower impacts for both greenhouse gases and water use compared to dairy and even some other plant milks.
Okay, so oat and pea looking pretty good there.
But then there's another layer. Some researchers argue that while plant milks might look better per liter, dairy might perform better if you compare the environmental impact per unit of nutritional value delivered, given its density in protein, calcium, etc.
The nutrition per impact angle, that complicates it.
It does. And one research also mentioned arguments sometimes made for dairy regarding potential benefits like supporting biodiversity on farms, maintaining rural economies, and maybe having more established systems for managing waste compared to potential issues with large-scale monocultures for plant milk ingredients or handling their processing byproducts. Though these are complex areas needing more consistent research.
Okay, so the environmental picture, like the nutritional one, is more complex than just plant good, dairy bad.
Definitely. We need more comprehensive, standardized studies that look at multiple environmental impacts consistently across all the different types to get the full story.
Right, so let's try and pull all these threads together. Based on this deep dive into the researches, what's the overall scientific take on plant-based milks right now?
Okay, key findings seem to be: first, consumer demand is booming, especially for almond and oat, driven by health perceptions, environmental ideas, dietary needs, you name it. But dairy still dominates the overall market volume and revenue.
Got it. Market shift is real, but dairy's still king.
Second, nutritionally, they are super variable. They don't naturally match dairy's profile, especially for protein and certain micronutrients. They rely heavily on fortification.
But the quality and absorption of that fortification can be uncertain, and the protein quality isn't always equivalent.
Exactly. Plus, many have added sugars and higher GI values than milk. Third, health-wise, the specific long-term benefits of drinking these particular beverages are less documented than the well-studied effects of dairy. There are real concerns about potential nutrient gaps if people switch without careful planning, especially for kids. Official recommendations for young children often single out fortified soy as preferable to other plant options for nutritional reasons.
And finally, environmentally, they generally have a lower footprint per liter. But there are significant exceptions like almond water use or rice emissions, and comparing impact per nutrient changes the perspective again.
Precisely. So the researchers basically conclude that plant-based milks are valuable for specific needs and preferences, but they're not all the same, and they're not necessarily a direct nutritional swap for dairy across the board.
Okay, so with all that complexity in mind, what practical advice did the researchers offer for listeners trying to navigate the plant milk aisle?
The number one tip, overwhelmingly, is read the labels carefully. Look at the ingredient list and the nutrition facts panel.
Know what you're buying.
Yes. Try to choose unsweetened varieties whenever possible to avoid those added sugars. That's a big one.
Good general health advice anyway.
Totally. And look for fortification. Check if it's fortified with calcium and vitamin D, and ideally vitamin B12 as well, since those are key nutrients found in dairy that might be low or missing otherwise.
So unsweetened and fortified are key things to look for.
Definitely. You might also want to look for options with shorter ingredient lists, fewer added gums, thickeners, oils if you're concerned about the processing level. Sometimes organic versions might have fewer additives, but not always. You still need to check.
What if protein is a major factor for someone?
Then you absolutely have to compare the protein content on the label. As we saw, it varies massively. Fortified soy milk or pea milk are usually your best bets for higher protein content, much more so than almond, oat, or rice.
And how should people think about incorporating them into their diet overall?
Well, they are great, even essential alternatives if you have lactose intolerance, a milk allergy, or follow a vegan diet. No question.
Right.
But if you're making the switch from dairy for other reasons, the key message from the researchers is to be mindful of what you might be losing nutritionally. Make sure you're getting enough protein, calcium, B12, iodine, and other important nutrients from other foods in your diet. Don't just assume the plant milk covers it all, especially if it's a lower protein type or you're unsure about the fortification.
So think about your whole diet, not just the milk carton.
Exactly. Oh, and one research mentioned making your own is possible, but just be aware homemade versions won't have the long shelf life of commercial ones and likely won't be fortified unless you add supplements yourself.
Right, good point. Okay, let's wrap this up with our sense check summary.
All right. So, plant-based milk, huge, growing market driven by lots of different factors. They start with plants but involve significant processing and added ingredients to mimic dairy, often landing them in the ultra-processed category.
Nutritionally, incredibly diverse. They depend heavily on fortification, but questions remain about how well we use those added nutrients and about the protein quality compared to dairy.
Health-wise, while whole plant-based diets are linked to benefits, the specific long-term advantages of these drinks themselves are less proven than dairies. There are potential risks of nutrient shortfalls, especially for kids, if the diet isn't balanced.
And environmentally, generally a lower impact per liter, but with notable exceptions and complexities when you consider things like water use for almonds or impact per nutrient.
So back to the main question, healthy alternatives or just ultra-processed drinks. The research strongly suggests it's not a simple yes or no. Many are ultra-processed based on their formulation and manufacturing. Their healthfulness really hangs on the specific type, the brand, the fortification, added sugar content, and critically, how they fit into your overall diet. No single plant milk we looked at perfectly replicates dairy's natural nutritional package.
So the final verdict from the researchers seems to be an informed consumer. Read labels religiously. Choose unsweetened, fortified options if appropriate for your needs. And make sure your total diet is providing everything you need, especially if you're replacing dairy for yourself or, critically, for children.
It really puts the onus on you, the shopper, to understand what you're choosing.
This has been incredibly insightful, so much to consider, and now we want to hear from you. Have you made the switch to plant-based milks? Why? What factors were important to you? Let us know your thoughts and experiences.
Yeah, and tell us what other topics you'd like us to tackle in a future deep dive.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the complex world of plant-based milks. Make sure you subscribe to the deep dive so you catch all our future explorations.
And we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. Given all this variability in nutrition, processing, and even environmental impact between different plant-based milks, and the fact that long-term research is still catching up, should there perhaps be clearer industry standards or more specific labeling, something to help consumers really understand the comparative nutritional value and potential impacts of the choices available?
Definitely something to ponder next time you're facing that huge wall of cartons in the dairy aisle. We'll catch you next time on the deep dive.